Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrobin. My guest today is Rabbi Vanessa Harper. She is passionate about shaping creative, joyful, and meaningful Jewish learning and living experiences for people of all ages. She currently serves as assistant rabbi at Temple Beth Elohim in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and reform scholar in residence at Gann Academy in Waltham, Massachusetts. In 2017, she created at Lech Challah. That's an Instagram-based education project using Challah as artistic medium for interpreting and teaching Torah and the Jewish calendar. That evolved into kinetic midrash classes that Vanessa taught all over the country and which resulted in her wonderful book, which we're going to talk about today, called Loaves of Torah, Exploring the Jewish Year Through Challah, published in 2023. Welcome to the broadcast, Rabbi Harper. It's good to see you again.
It's lovely to see you as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, this is a book that makes me salivate while it also educates. And I don't just say that to be cute, it really does both. And as I'm sure you have heard in other interviews, there is some surprise that Torah could be braided in with a delicious staple of Shabbat. What was the idea to marry Torah to Challah, and how did you get started?
Well, the funny thing is this whole project really started as an accident, in truth. So when I was in rabbinical school, we were having a Shabbat gathering one evening. So I was with my rabbinic and cantorial classmates, and it just so happened that it was the week we're reading Parshat Noach, which is when we read the Rainbow Covenant. And I had seen some images of rainbow chalot on the internet before, and I was like, that looks really cool. I think I can do that with my very rudimentary challah baking skills, but it's kind of a pain. I'm not just going to do it for my husband and I. So but this is an occasion. So I make this rainbow challah and I bring it to this gathering and everyone's delighted. And as we're all taking a bite after motzi, one of my teachers says, "Hey, Vanessa, do you match your Torah to the challah every week? Like, do you make a challah for the Torah portion every single week?" And I was like, And I took about a half a second to think, okay, could I do this? If I were to do this, what is the hardest Torah portion I can possibly think of?
Tazria.
Mitzorah. This is, every b'mitzvah kid is like, this is the horror is that they'll get Tazria Mitzorah with the skin disease and so I was like, okay, what would I do for Tazria Mitzorah? Maybe we'll do some like slivered almonds on top. Great. So I said, yes, that is a thing that I do. I match my challah to the Torah portion every week. And then I had to do the thing. So it really started as a delightful accident, but having this inspiration and this push to engage with a practice of weekly Torah reading through a totally different medium and using my hands when I spend so much time up here reading and writing and talking, it really helped me to understand and see Torah in a different way. And then I started posting the pictures to Instagram, mostly to keep me accountable, but people started following along. And so then I started adding a little commentary to explain like what was the verse I was working with, what was I trying to teach and what was going through my mind. And people really latched onto it. And so over the course of the many years that I've been doing this, it really became a way of saying like, okay, this is a way that we can take Torah into our own hands in a totally different way and bring it to life in a different way. Judaism really is an embodied religion, but like we don't always get to see Torah show up in such a sensory way.
And in a tactile way. I think what I love that I've heard you say is that in a way the dough is the chevruta, that it's kind of talking back to you as you figure out what to do each week. Can you just describe the process? Like, are you thinking on Sunday, what's the piece of the verse? What's the idea that is going to inform the bread?
Yeah. So when I was doing this project initially, with the turn of the week, so Sunday, I would usually, if I had time on Sunday, I would sit down with the Parsha, I'd read it all the way through and just start to see what was popping up. When I teach this, I often encourage people to look for what's an image or a big idea or a word that really sticks out to you, just that jumps off the page. And it it could be something that's obvious or something that's not obvious. And so I'd spend the next couple days kind of mulling over that word or idea or image. And the thing about working with challah dough as an artistic and interpretive medium is it's not quite as flexible as paint or clay. It can't do everything that you want it to do. And so that's where the cool, like the chavruta piece comes in, which is that the challah dough has some boundaries. If you've ever made bread before, you know that bread dough has feelings. It doesn't want to do everything on any particular day. And so you have to listen to what the dough is telling you. And it's the same thing when we study in chavruta, as I'm sure you know, right? That when we're looking at a text and we're kind of holding an idea and we're working with a chavruta to pick it apart, we are trying to balance both our own input and our own interpretations and bringing out the voice of our chavruta, of our partner, as well as the voice of the text. And so in working with challah dough, that dough is alive and it's responsive to its environment and what's going on that day and to what you're putting in with your shaping. And the product that's going to come out is not 100% in my control, because the dough has some input in it as well. And so it's a way of like, okay, what is it that the dough is bringing? What are its limits? What's it going to allow me to do? And then how can I be creative within those boundaries? So in that thinking process, kind of working through like, okay, how can I take my interpretation, my idea that I want to play with this image or this word, this concept, and what's the dough going to allow me to do? And then usually by Thursday, we'd meet in the middle and I'd actually shape the thing and see what came out of the oven, which is always going to be some degree of collaboration between me and my interpretation and my input, and then what's going on with the dough and all of that bringing the text of Torah to life.
And so we're going to be showing some of these pictures as we discuss it, but on the left side of the page is the result, this gorgeous, it's really like a piece of art. On the right page is the Parsha, and there's commentary and prompts, so people can also talk about it. I just want to give one example so people can kind of get a sense. I loved Vayera, Exodus 7:3 is where it starts, and you quote, I won't do the whole quote, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. And we all, I think many of us, especially those of us who are alert during the Seder, think about how part of why Pharaoh did not relent is because his heart was being hardened by God. And I love what you went for is Pharaoh's heart, that the picture is of the dough, the bread is of a heart. So can you talk a little bit about why that was your focus? And let me just quote you very briefly in your own words. 7 times in Vayera, we read about Pharaoh's heart. Underneath the cinematic excitement of frogs covering every surface and fiery hail falling from the sky, this epic narrative surprisingly hinges on the state of one person's heart and on what it means to be strong. So I'll let you take it from there, but it's a beautiful commentary.
Oh, thank you. It's one of those pieces of Torah that's really difficult for a lot of people, especially when, as you highlighted, right, this idea that Pharaoh's heart is being hardened. At one point, it's him, and then it shifts to God's doing that hardening. And the interesting thing about the verb itself that's being used is that we can interpret it a couple of different ways or translate it a few different ways, including the idea of being strengthened. So Pharaoh's trying to strengthen his heart, or God is hardening his heart. So we get a couple of different iterations of what's going on there. And so for me, when I see something like that, it's this image, right? What does it mean for a heart to be strengthened or hardened? And what's going on there? And so that's one of those like, ooh, let's play. What's going on here? And the whole narrative really does hinge on the emotional state of this one person, and we can read it as hubris or fear of what is it that he has to lose, and the psychological drama that's going on for Pharaoh is so fascinating. And because we can understand the human side of this, we've got this huge narrative with all these crazy miracles and God doing all this amazing stuff that we can't always understand, sometimes because it's a little difficult to wrap our heads around, and sometimes because just wow. But Pharaoh's a person, and we can get in there a little bit more. And so that's what I was playing with myself and inviting other people into as well.
I want to just go to your Instagram feed as well because it's very intertwined with the book and it has these wonderful photos and marks certain holidays. When you shaped a challah into a shofar, it's just extraordinary. And also, it couldn't be more of a match. You align it with a photo of a ram's horn, and you say. The high holidays are coming. The arrival of Elul this evening heralds the beginning of a long season of reflection and repentance, which reaches its peak at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, et cetera, et cetera. I'm wondering when you take something like a holiday, is the Torah different? Is the challah different? Does it feel like it has to do more work?
Mm. That's a great question. Going through the holiday cycle was year 2 of this project for me. So I started with the whole Torah cycle, and then people were like, "Great, what's next?" Like, I guess we'll do the Jewish calendar. So I went through the holidays and each of the Jewish months as well. And so it was interesting because in certain cases, especially for the months, for Rosh Chodesh every month, there's not always a clear text. Holidays, usually, especially the biblical holidays, there's something we can go to in Torah, but not always. And so one of the things that was cool about that second year for me and my own process was also saying, okay, what's a text? And what else can we play with? And so just taking the holidays more broadly, what are the themes? What are the things we're thinking about? What's going on culturally? All these different pieces could come in a different way when we open up that concept of what's a sacred text. And our calendar is a text and we live it. And in the same way we live Torah, but it's something that's just, again, so much more embodied. And there's more room, I would say, for play and innovation, which is at the heart of what I'm doing with this challah. We're taking something that's here, it's part of the culture, it's part of our story, and there's room and there's license to innovate and make it new and make it ours. So same thing we can do with the holidays. And I think that's actually a place that more people do that play. So I think for Rosh Hashanah, I was pulling from a Torah text. It's been a minute, I haven't seen it. But the idea of what are those cultural touchstones? Sometimes makes it like easy. Okay, I have something to work with here that's a no-brainer, but then also it's not always pushing people to think in another direction. So I tried to go for a balance between sometimes an image is just, it's very recognizable. You get that joy of like, oh, I know that. And then also sometimes I went for something a little bit more abstract to try to prompt a little like, oh, what's going on there?
And what about the recipe? Yeah. People are very passionate about their challah recipes. And you are giving guidance as to how to make a challah and how to also create some of these because they're pretty complicated. What's your go-to? Is there and did you modify it over time?
Oh, good question. So I use a very gently modified version of Deb Perlman's challah recipe. She's the author of Smitten Kitchen. We've been following a very long time. And so I use one of her challah recipes, not her basic one, but one with olive oil and sea salt. And so I offer a couple variations for like, what kind of oil do you want to use? What kind of sweetener do you want to use? Challah dough is more forgiving than many people give it credit for. And so my first advice is find something that works for you. I've heard stories from different people over time who, I talked to a lot of people about bread who have said, actually at different points in their lives, there would be a major shift and suddenly their challah recipe like stopped working for them. Like their go-to recipe it didn't work and they had to switch to a new recipe. And there's something about, there's like this weird emotional piece that we can't always understand, the joy of working with something that's living, but that everyone should use a dough that works for them. This is a recipe that works particularly well for me, and I include it in the book because it's so well suited to doing the kind of shaping work that I do. It's a tiny bit more flexible, a little bit more moisture in it, so it can hold some of these crazy shapes, go a little thin, and yeah, again, whatever works for people is great. In the back of the book, I usually don't do okay, here is how to make my ER wheat challah, because it's not so much about like, great, here's what I did, please replicate what I did, but rather the whole idea of the book is this is an invitation for you to create something that's meaningful for you, to look at the text and create your own interpretation, to sit with a holiday and say, what's important about this to me? And how can I create something that reflects that and that I can bring to the table? So the back of the book has what I call my shaping toolbox. So it's a couple of different basic techniques, like how do we make a strand? How do we make a braid? How do we make a spiral? And each of these can be turned into an infinite number of different shapes. And if you look through the book, you'll see you can kind of take apart what's been made with each of these different shapes. And so it's kind of a how-to, but it's more of the like, here's the building blocks. Now go play and make something cool that's your own.
And are you like a pro heating your challah before you eat it person? Are you pro butter? Like, where do you come out on these things?
Let's see. I am happy to eat challah at any temperature, but you can't beat a warm challah. So I usually can't time it so that it comes out right before dinner, but like if I have a second to put in the oven.
I'm glad we're aligned on that. On a more serious note, Vanessa, there are people who would say that you're making too light of Torah. And I've heard these accusations of, you're in a way watering down the seriousness of Torah study. What's your response to that? And particularly because I know you are someone very learned who takes her Torah seriously.
Thank you for that question. So something that's at the heart of this particular project is that I think Torah is something that belongs to each and every one of us. And we're all going to be able to get to that Torah and to share our own Torah in different ways. And so this is about opening up the kinds of languages that we can use to talk about Torah, to learn Torah. I'm going to detour for a second into early childhood philosophy, early childhood pedagogy philosophy. I was trained in a methodology called Reggio Emilia, and the founder of this methodology teaches that when we're born, we have hundreds and hundreds of creative languages that we can access. That sand is a creative language, and dance is a creative language, and working with wire is a creative language. All of these are different ways that we can express ourselves, and we're each going to have a few that we're really, really good at. But if we don't have the space to be able to learn and play with those languages, we lose them over time. And so especially, as we get older and we move through a school system that privileges particular kinds of language, like reading and writing and discussion, if my language is challah dough, when do I get to really express what's going on in here? And so this is an invitation. Again, it's your language may not be challah dough. That's fine. I found that completely by accident. Maybe it's decorative hummus swirling. I don't know. But whatever your language is, that this is to say, like, Torah is yours, and it's going to come out through that language in a special way. And it's reflected in our tradition too. There's a story that when the Israelites were receiving Torah at Mount Sinai, the text says that they saw voices in this moment, ro'im et hakolot, which sometimes is translated as like thunder and lightning, but can also mean voices. So they saw voices. And we're like, okay, it's weird first that they saw them, but second, like, why voices? Only God was talking, and we know there's only one of those. So how could there have been multiple voices? So the rabbis come in with a midrash in Shemot Rabbah, teaching that God's voice actually went out in a different way to each and every person, and that they heard revelation in a different voice according to their own strength and their own need. And so tradition also teaches that every Jewish soul that ever was and ever will be was there at Sinai, and so got a piece of that revelation of Torah directly from God in a voice that's suited specifically to them. And so we're all carrying around this special piece of Torah that's only ours, that no one else can access unless we bring it into the world. And if we only have like a couple kinds of language that we can express it through, there's going to be so much Torah that's lost, that doesn't get to make its way into the world. And so the idea here is to try to open up access to that Torah that can come in all different forms. And it's not just the kinds of heavy Torah that I also love to learn, but there's Torah in everything and in everyone. And so this is more about maximizing how can we bring out as much of that Torah as we can.
I love that. Rabbi Michael Marmer gave you a blurb that I'm going to read back because it seems just so apt here. He wrote, "She has needed, and that's KN, needed themes and ideas to be found in every weekly portion and baked up a midrash you can eat." And what I love is that there is something, we talked about tactile. It feels in a way like more active Torah in a certain way, not as cerebral, something that you're actually linking to a sensory experience that seems really powerful. What do you say to people who are either daunted by baking or daunted by Torah study?
Yeah. So the Daunted by Baking, first of all, I had made like maybe 15 loaves of bread before I started this project. It's okay. Try it. If it doesn't work, you can blame it on the yeast. It's fine. And also, baking doesn't have to be your thing. So, like I was saying before, it could be that like you love playing with watercolor. Watercolor is a great medium to spin out some ideas of Torah. Awesome. Or it could be another kind of food related thing. Maybe you're a great cook and you think about something from the parsha coming out and the ingredients that you're using to create dinner. And so, but all of these are different ways that we can access some of those ideas of Torah and to bring them to the table. And especially when we're talking about food, because it is so connected to memory. Taste and smell are like they can hit a level of subconscious memory in a way that many things can't. There's a reason why challah and other Jewish foods have so much staying power and so much resonance. It's because they have that embodied, deep sensory connection. And so when we can bring Torah into that picture, and have that conversation inspired by this fascinating bread that you brought to the table, like that's really cool. And the great news is, even if it doesn't come out super well, you're like, it's abstract. What do you see in this bread? It also works. And for those who are intimidated by Torah study, it's something that you can take one level at a time. It can really be a word, like just opening up the parsha and saying like, oh, here's a phrase. What do I think is happening? What does it mean to me? What might it have meant to somebody else? You don't have to be the next Rabbi Akiva. It's more about how are you encountering these words, and is there a way that you can bring them out into the world in some way so they don't just sit on the page?
Beautiful. And can you just remind our viewers about the challah history, like the basic? It connects back to the biblical practice of tithing. Am I right about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a couple of threads that go back to biblical times. So the first one, which is where we get the name for challah and also the mitzvah, the commandment that's associated with challah, goes back to Numbers and to a tithe, or kind of like a tax that went to the priests in ancient days, because the priests were reliant upon sacrifices that came from the community for their own dinner and their livelihood. And so one of those tithes was when you would bake a large batch of bread, you would take a loaf of it basically and bring it to the priest. And that was the Challah offering. And so there is still a practice that actually, it's really interesting because many practices like this they're linked specifically to the land of Israel. And so after the exile, a lot of these laws, they were just supposed to kind of disappear, and many of them did, except for challah. And so this practice continued of taking out a small piece of the batch of dough, and then symbolically burning it or disposing of it. And one of the theories behind this is because this was one of the few areas where women's spirituality and women's religious practice came into view. There are only a couple of mitzvot that are specifically connected to women. And so that this was a way of like maintaining that meaningful practice. And so that's why it stuck around when others didn't. And so that practice persists today. It's called Hafreshat Challah, and that's taking out this little symbolic piece of a large batch of dough. And that's the mitzvah, and one of the places where Challah's name comes from. There's a couple of other places in Torah where Challah has some roots, and especially a lot of practices associated with Challah. So there were bread offerings that were kept in the tabernacle. There would be kind of 2 stacks of 6 specially made breads, and that practice is reflected in different challah making cultures around the Jewish world, especially in Mizrahi communities, some Sephardi communities. People still make kind of like a flatter bread and serve them in stacks like that on the Shabbat table. Many Ashkenazi chalot you'll see are made with 6 strands, and 2 will be served together. 6 plus 6 is 12. They each represent the ancient tribes of Israel. So we see some of the shaping references there. And also it connects back to the manna. So when the Israelites were wandering in the desert, God was providing food for them that came down from the sky, which was pretty great. And on Fridays, there would be a double portion that would come down because they were not supposed to go out and collect it on Shabbat. And so you'll often also see 2 chalot brought to the table on Shabbat as a reminder of that double portion of the manna. And I can go on and on and on, like why sesame seeds are sprinkled on top. Same idea. All kinds of things. Salt also, sprinkling that connects back to the temple. Wow. So much stuff.
So if someone wants to get your book, what's the easiest way? Amazon? Like, do you have a website? Tell us.
Yeah, best option is to go right through the CCAR Press. So ccarpress.org, and it's called Loaves of Torah. And yeah, I'm very grateful to the CCAR Press for working with me on this book. And it came out really beautifully, and I'm just excited to have it out in the world.
That's so wonderful. Leave us with one last thought about how you want the book used.
I just want to reiterate the invitation that it is. So if you're like, you know what, I'm never going to bake a loaf of challah in my life, that's totally fine. There is a lot in there that's really designed to be there to help you just dig into Torah a little bit more, to get to play with some different questions or different creative prompts if you have another medium. And the invitation is to make Torah yours and to play a little bit, just to bring in some joy. We don't have to be all super duper serious all the time. Joy is such an important part of what it means to be Jewish. And play is something that we don't get to do enough as adults. And so that's really what the invitation is here, is to see Torah as something that's beautiful, something that lives in us, that comes into the world in all kinds of unexpected ways, and that it's an invitation for a smile and to bring in some Jewish joy.
I love that. Rabbi Vanessa Harper, thank you for this book. It is called Loaves of Torah, Exploring the Jewish Year Through Challah, and you can get it at CCAR Press. And thank you so much for being with us today. I am Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight. I will see you next time with plenty of bread